When did you first realize you were a carer?
Well, it was a case of role reversal, really, because I'd had 15 years of back and hip problems that started in my mid-50s. And Paul had always looked after me, and done things for me that I couldn't do. And eventually I got a back operation in February 2016, just before we moved here to Wales. And I'm happy to say that after that I was much better, but Paul had got into the habit of looking out for me and making sure I was okay. So when he got ill, Paul had never ever been ill before. He didn't know what the inside of a hospital looked like. He'd never been to the doctors almost. He had been diagnosed with diabetes 10 years earlier, but he dealt with that himself quite competently. He didn't need any help. He sorted it all out, went to did his appointments when he needed to do them, and he was on pills at that stage. But one night when we were over at my daughter's in Aberdare, we'd been over there to have supper, and on the way back he said to me, I think you should drive, my shoulder's really stiff. And so I drove back. He very rarely asked me to drive. He loved driving. He was a good driver. I had no worries about that. But I had been driving about 10 years longer than he had. So, there was no sort of nothing going on there at all. It was just, I'm feeling stiff. Can you drive it back? By next morning, he'd blown up like a Michelin man, and I realized that something really serious was going on here. And from then on, it was just the cancer roller coaster, but it was that when he asked me to drive back, I knew something serious was going on. And actually, he never drove again after that, although he was very well at some times, because he needed the doctors to agree with him having his license renewed, and they never did. For whatever reason, I don't know, but they never did sign the form and let him have his license back. So he never drove again, and that was a terrible blow to him. He found that a terrible blow to his sort of integrity and everything. Poor old thing. But, so he had to put up with my driving for the rest of the time, and there was a lot of it. So many appointments all over the place, day after day after day. But we made it. We got there, found the places on the right, thanks to Google Maps. Yeah.
And having said that, what do you believe are some of the challenges and also the joys of caring?
There were loads of challenges, really, because it changes. My husband and I always had a really good relationship. We loved each other right up until the end. And the trouble was that, once because he was terminally ill right from the beginning, we knew that something really terrible had happened, and really the challenges was I found it very difficult in lots of ways to talk to him about his illness. In fact, mostly because we went to so many hospital appointments, I used to do it in the car with him, because I found it was easier. If I was concentrating on the driving, he didn't feel so under the microscope, really, and he might actually talk about it a bit. Mostly he just went silent. He went completely silent. From being a really talkative, happy man, really, he just clammed up completely, and it was really hard to get him to talk about himself, really, and what was going on and all that sort of stuff. That may be a bloke thing, possibly, but I think he was completely bewildered by what was happening. It was just way out of his sort of league of experience and understanding. He was just blown away by what was going on. So trying to keep some a sort of low-key level of communication going with him about what he was thinking and what he wanted to do and where he wanted to go, and would he like to do this. I mean, it was negotiation all the way through, and that was so hard, really. The whole, I mean, having had a big family, I'm very used to negotiation, because we've all through our lives together, that's happened. But this was a different sort of negotiation. It was much more delicate and much more nerve-wracking, really. And it was I found it really difficult to talk to him because, you know, I was in the position of the one who was going to live, and he was now the position of the one who was not going to live. And it was hard. It was very hard. And the challenges, it was just, yes, I mean, it was a physical challenge as well. You know, it's just keeping going. It was, when I look back on, I write a diary so that, you know, I know exactly what happened every single day from the minute he was diagnosed. And that's been incredibly useful, really, as a tool. And I would tell everybody to do that when if your partner gets seriously ill, keep a diary, because it's incredibly interesting to go back and look at it now. And looking back at it now, I don't know how we did what we did, the relentlessness of the, you know, the program that we were a part of to try and I mean, he was never going to be cured. That was clear right from the start, but there was hope at various points that his life might be prolonged a bit, but that didn't really happen in the end. The surgeon, he never had surgery in the end, but the surgeon told us he had 18 months basically, and he lived for 16 months. And, you know, that's the way it went, really. And the joys were hard, not many actually. There really weren't very many. I suppose one of the joys was it encouraged a lot of more family get-togethers than would have normally gone on. You know, from the moment he was diagnosed, we have 5 children, and all of them have families. So we've got 13 grandchildren, and so, you know, they all piled in with their attention, you know, and they came to visit and they did everything they possibly could. And we had 2 of them live in Australia, and our Australian daughter came over a lot. She came over 3 times while in that 16-month period and stayed quite a long time, although she's got children to look after herself in Oz. You know, she came over. A son who lives in Oz, he came over for a couple of weeks in the October. But it was a busy time. You know, we had lots of visitors here coming to stay, and, you know, I was on the phone to his friends because he wasn't very good. We were born, you know, in 1946, and telephones when we were young were exotic things, and Paul's family didn't have one when he was growing up, you know, and so he never sort of got used to telephones. He hated the telephone. He hated having to ring people up, and he hated having to talk on it. And so, you know, I knew that he would never phone his friends and tell them what had happened. So I did. And so I rallied everybody round, got everybody visiting, you know, got him taken out and doing things, got his best friends staying here regularly, so that, you know, he could see as much of them and they could see as much of him as we could possibly manage at the time. That was all really stressful, but you know, I'm glad I did that. That was worth doing, you know. And eventually he started to do, when he started radiotherapy, you know, I said to him, you need to have some way, you know, why don't you start a little blog and have a little way of talking to all your friends, you know, all his school college. You know, as a teacher, you know, he taught for a long time in 3 different schools and had loads of teacher friends. And he was also a marker for AQA, English A-level, and all sorts of stuff he did as well as that. And so he started doing this little funny bloggy newsletter to all his friends, and that was very good for him because they came back to him, you know, and he got dozens of emails from everybody, from all his pals, and that really was so good for him, you know. And that was one of the joys, I think, that you know, that he was able that way. He wouldn't pick up the phone to them, but he would just write a short. He was very cryptic, Paul, very dry sense of humor and very cryptic. And they were often very funny, his little emails to everybody. And, you know, people loved them, you know, and it gave him some way of expressing what was going on, you know, for him.
Thank you for sharing both of those sides to it, and thinking of other carers out there, right? What do you believe we could do to shed more of a light on caring, particularly because caring can be quite a hidden part of society? How do we make it more visible?
I know it is a big problem. That I think we've got a problem with the name for a start. You know, caring covers so many things. You know, it's what mums and dads do. It's what, you know, it covers right through family life, and then there's the professional side of caring as well. You know, so it's a very blanket sort of term, isn't it? And I think that's what makes it difficult, because we sort of need another sort of term for what we do, really, or what we've had, you know, I've done in the past. But for people who are, you know, in a family, you need to be have some term like family carer or something else to make you more distinct from the you know, and particularly with COVID as well, being a carer has now become a thing in a different way, you know. So but I do think I agree with you. There's this whole enormous all this stuff going on below the horizon, done by carers, and nobody sees it happening, and it's a very lonely job, you know. For a lot of people it'll be a very lonely job doing it, and you have to make all sorts of decisions along the way, you know, hopefully with your cared for person, but sometimes you just have to go it alone and just say, no, this is the right thing, we shouldn't do that, we should do this, you know, and try and guide everybody in the right direction, because they put a lot of pressure on you to go back into hospital for more treatment and more treatment and more treatment. But I was convinced that was absolutely the wrong thing to do in Paul's case. He was in Morriston for 5 weeks and he nearly died in there. And it took us weeks to get him to eat again afterwards. And just, you know, he lost so much body weight and all his musculature, and he just changed into a totally different person. And I just felt that any long stay, if they were considering any long stay in hospital, we should very carefully consider that, because I didn't think that was going to have a good outcome for him at all. So there was quite a lot of batting off the medical people who just want to fix him. You know, I quite understand that's what they do, but sometimes you can't fix somebody, and it may be just better to let them live those last few weeks and months peacefully, you know, without too much pressure on them, you know. And I think, you know, during the last couple of months when there wasn't really any more treatment that could happen, we had a lot of trouble unhitching us from the medical teams who just wanted to fix him. And, you know, it wasn't really appropriate any longer, you know. I didn't want him to die. He did die in St. Gunlice Hospital, which was fine in my view. That was what he wanted. You know, if he couldn't die here, and it all got too difficult for me, it was all about his diabetes really, but it all got too difficult for me to handle here. And so he was in the hospital for a month. And that was fine, but I really didn't want him to end up, you know, they were talking about taking his brain tumours down in the hospital in Cardiff, and I had visions of him dying down there in a Cardiff hospital somewhere where none of us could visit very easily, and that wasn't a good scenario for him, I thought. And you know, so my daughter was, you know, I have a daughter who's in her early 40s, and she lives in Aberdare, and you know, between us we made a lot of the decisions going along about what would happen really. Because I'm not sure that the person, although the doctors ask the person themselves, I don't think they're in the right frame of mind to be able to see the wood for the trees, as my dad used to say, you know, because there's too much going on, you know, that it's too difficult for them. It was so, you know, it's so very emotional and difficult. It was just trying to keep some sort of logical process going on about what the best thing to do at end of life is, you know, because everybody's so reluctant to talk about what they want at end of life. But I did get in there and talk to Paul about it and so we wrote to the local surgery and said, this is what Paul wants, you know, and they stuck to that letter right to the end, bless them. And one of my messages to other carers is, if you're looking after somebody in an end-of-life situation, write down what they want and make sure the surgery has it on file, so that as things move to the end game, you all know what you're doing, you know, and it stops all that confusion and difficulty and emotion as you get towards the end, because it's all planned out and you know where you're going and how it's going to happen. You know, that would be one of my messages, is to get all your paperwork in place and make sure you've had that discussion with your GP, and preferably write a letter to them and say how your person wants it to go, because nobody wants to talk about it or discuss it, but it's going to happen if you've got a terminally ill patient. And yeah, I've no idea. Super women and supermen, I think carers should be, because you get so much thrown at you and it is so difficult. And particularly since a lot of carers, you know, are my age, in their 70s, 80s, whatever, and it's even worse then, because you're dealing with your own physical problems as well as, you know, trying to look after somebody who's very ill as well. And that requires, you know, it does require a lot of physical work a lot of the time. You know, it's does.
I think you're absolutely right about you know, we say almost the unsung heroes in our communities. Next door, in your family, could be you. And I think you're absolutely right. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for sharing this.
It's a pleasure.